Hello everyone, this is General Hand Grenade. Welcome to my war room in Prince George, British Columbia. This is the next video in the series of needed units for Global War 1936 to 1945. We're going to start off today with the Russians. Now I've already done the neutrals, exactly what you needed for the neutrals, and I've done the basics that you need, the chips and the dice and all that stuff, and that all nations that need collectively. I've done the Germans, and I've talked a lot about that, so I don't need to rehash all that stuff. I'm going to assume that you've already watched those videos, because I am going to put all of these videos into a playlist, and in each of the videos I will put the free download for you of the units. So as you're watching this video, you don't need to sit there with a piece of paper and a pen writing down the number of units that I tell you. You can just go to the description box below the video and download. They'll all be together, so you can download all of the units that you're going to need, and chips and all that stuff, to play version 3 of Global War 1936 to 1945. So let's get started. Now, the hell? Sorry, I'm looking here. I missed the German submarine. Let's get that out of there. Okay, so the Russians. Now, I talked when I was talking about the Germans that if a neutral gets attacked or something, that the extra territories would go to somebody else, to the opposite side. But that's not really true with Russia or Japan. Except for the Russians, except for Mongolia. So let's say Japan attacks this territory and takes it, and Russia and Japan are at war, then these three territories will become Russia. So that's no big deal. You don't have to worry about extra units as far as battles with the neutral territories go. But with diplomacy, though, it's possible that you could need some units. Like, you could try with the diplomacy expansion set, you could try to acquire some of those territories down there, or like maybe try to get Sweden. There's tons of units for Sweden in there. So for that reason, you are going to need a couple of extra coastal defense ships and a couple of extra torpedo boat destroyers. There's only two coastal submarines on the whole board, and that's the one here in Sweden. I'm talking about for the neutrals, one in Sweden and one for the Netherlands. So I don't know that you would need extra ones of those. You do get a lot of coastal submarines, as you're going to see, for the Russians, but that's you're going to use those mostly if you're playing the 1939 scenario. If you're playing the 1936 scenario, which I think most people will probably prefer, then there's only one coastal submarine in the opening setup here. So you're going to have lots of extra coastal submarines. I'm just going to throw in an extra couple of torpedo boat destroyers because the neutrals have lots of those, and so it just gives you that extra added depth if you plan on playing with the diplomacy expansion. If you've seen the video that I made on diplomacy expansion and it's something that you're not interested in, well, then you don't need any coastal defense ships, right? And when the setups come out, then you can decide how many exactly you're going to need, because you're not going to need any getting them from the neutrals. Mongolia is landlocked there. Although this territory is landlocked too, and you can see there's a torpedo boat destroyer in there. So anyway, let's move forward here. So Russia, lots of ground units. Tons of ground units is what you're going to need. Very few boats. I'm saying 30 infantry and 12 militia. Now, you could even go with more militia than that. I don't think you can go with too many militia. So it just depends on how you do your militia, right? Like, if you're going to glue them on chips like I have here, then you're going to have to be more specific and a better guesser at how you do. But if you're just going to have a lot of militia chips and you're just going to put the units on there as you go, then you've got some flexibility, right? Because you might use less for some other nation and more for the Russians in this particular game. or whatever, vice versa with another nation. So 12 at the minimum, okay? Now with the other ones, I just give them it's easier to go by fives because that's how historical board gaming sells them. So like here's a mountain infantry chip here, right? Underneath this Afghani guy here. Now, all those chips come in sets of 5, or even the units that you get, like there's mountain infantry units that you can get. Those come in sets of 5. So I'll just give you those in 5. So 5 mountain infantry, 5 airborne infantry, 5 marines, and 5 cavalry. Like you can just buy those as sets of 5, and that should be enough for the Russians. And if you find when you're playing that that's not enough, then buy more. You can always use chips, right? Like that just gives you those units in 5 different locations. I feel pretty confident that you're not going to ever use 5 marines, or 5 airborne infantry, but who knows? You never know. That one game that is weird that you might use them, right? You start with a lot of motorized infantry for the Russians here. Let me see, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5 motorized infantry just in the opening setup alone. So you're probably going to need probably 10 of those. Like I said, lots of ground troops in this game. 10 Katyushkas, or whatever they call them. Those are the rocket propelled things that are on the back of trucks. Let me just grab one of these here. Now, I think you're going to need at least 10 of these. I've got 10 of them, and that's probably good enough because that gives you them in 10 different spaces. You can always put chips underneath to say that would be 2 or 3 or whatever, right? But the reason I'm saying you need so many of them is because there is such a useful weapon for the Russians. The stats on them are really, really good. And like good attack and defense versus cost ratio. So those are really, really handy for the Russians. You probably want to go with 10. 10 mechanized infantry, 10 light tanks. Light tanks are great in this game because you're not going to be able to buy medium tanks until 1939, right? And so one of a light tank is just about the toughest piece of equipment you're going to be able to have before then. And the Russians, it's possible they could be attacking neutrals before then, right? So light tanks are a good buy in this game. And they're a good buy anytime, right? Probably 10 to 15 medium tanks would be good. Tanks in the Eastern Front here between Russia and Germany. Germany sets up over here. Eventually, the Eastern Front will be here, and it'll move back or forth depending on who's getting the upper hand. The Germans have more money, and they will probably have the upper hand. They'll definitely have the first strike if they want. The ability to attack Russia before Russia has the ability to attack them. So it's probably going to be the Germans that are the aggressor here. But tanks, definitely. All 3 sizes of tanks. The light tanks and, like I said, 10 to 15 medium tanks. And 5 heavy tanks. I think I've even got more than that. I think I have 10 heavy tanks for the Russians because with that and the Katyushkas, those are the best weapons that you can get, that you can develop for the Russians. Anyway, 5 advanced mechanized infantry, 10 artillery, 5 advanced artillery, 5 to 10 anti-aircraft artillery. Now remember, you get to use these anti-aircraft artillery in attack, not just in defense in this game. So those are pretty good to have. Only 5 submarines, 5 advanced submarines, just in case you happen to develop those. 3 transport planes, 5 medium bombers, 10 fighters, 10 tactical bombers, 5 strategic bombers. Strategic bombers aren't as good in this game as they are in a game like Axis and Allies. They have a different role in this game. So you don't think you're going to be playing any type of dark sky strategies for anybody in this game. So 5 strategic bombers, and you'd be lucky if you buy 2 of them in a game for the Russians. 5 heavy bombers, 5 jet fighters. Now, I give you these weapons, even though I say, you're probably not going to develop these kind of weapons like advanced submarines for the Russians, but it just gives you that option of doing that. Just know that, like as far as advanced submarines go, that's buy something else first if you have to buy a lot of things, right? Um, so where were we? Jet fighters, 5 heavy cruisers. Now, heavy cruisers in this game are the regular cruisers that you're used to. They're just called cruisers in any other game before version 3. So, but there's 3 cruisers in this game, and so that's why they had to label those heavy cruisers. So 5 heavy cruisers. I think you're going to need 5 light cruisers because in the 1939 setup, there's actually 5 light cruisers in that, if you include the stuff that comes in on the build chart. 2 battle cruisers. There's none of those in the opening setup, but it just gives you the option of buying battle cruisers. Those are a pretty good unit. 8 destroyers. Destroyers are always good in this game. For one thing, those and transports and submarines are the only boats that you can build all at once. The other ones you have to build, including the light cruisers, you have to take more than one turn to build. So it is nice to be able to buy a boat that you need this turn, right? So yeah, among the other traits that destroyers have, that's one of the good ones. 5 torpedo boat destroyers. Now that's going to give you a couple of extra ones to use in case you're playing with the diplomacy. 5 to 10 tank destroyers. Now, tank destroyers is a unit that is going to be better on defense than offense. And like I said, the Russians are probably going to be on the defensive, like they are in other games, like they are in version 2. It's likely that they will be on the defensive, and it might turn, with pressure getting put on the Western Front for the Germans, that might turn around. But initially, it's probably the Germans coming after the Russians. And so tank destroyers are great because you can target their tanks. If you roll a 1 to 3, then you get to take a tank off. And so that's better than taking a German infantry off, right? And you could even use that to take a German heavy tank off, like a Tiger tank. So tank destroyers are going to be great. 5 self-propelled artillery. 5 coastal submarines. And yeah, there's actually 5 coastal submarines in the 1939 setup. There's only 1 in the 1936 setup. So if you're never going to play the 1939 setup, then one is probably, or 1 or 2, because you might get that one in Sweden there if you're playing with diplomacy. So also I put down 2 coastal defense ships. That's it only if you're playing diplomacy though. It gives you the option of playing with that expansion set. Otherwise, there's no way that you're going to be getting coastal defense ships unless the setups are changed between now and the time the game comes out. They're not set in stone just yet, and they'll probably be done in the next little while. So if they change, then I'll certainly let you know, right? But as of right now, there's no coastal defense ships in the Russian setup. Just 2 battleships. You might not even need one of them, right? I think there's one in the 1939 setup on the build chart. 1 fast battleship, 1 heavy battleship. Those just gives you the options of buying those things in case you, just in case that one game out of 50 where the Russians are going to buy a heavy battleship. 2 fleet carriers, that's your regular size carriers with the 2 planes that go on them. Just in case you want to build a carrier. 2 escort carriers, those are the little carriers that have 1 plane. 1 heavy carrier, those are the carriers with 3 planes. Just in case, like I said. 2 seaplanes. I put 2 seaplanes for every nation. As I play the game more and as you play the game more, we all might discover that we use more or less of those. I've only played 1 game with seaplanes, and so I haven't really got a feel for those yet. But I think that 2 is a good start. It might need more than that. We'll see, depending on what nation you are too, right? 6 transports is probably good enough. And because you're going to be buying the attack transports in groups of 5, if you're not planning on painting them, then you might as well just get 5 attack transports. Those are going to be good if you develop the attack transport weapon. 4 major factories, 5 medium factories, and 5 minor factories. That rounds it out. I think you start with, let me see, 1, 2, 3 major factories, but that doesn't mean that you're not going to maybe upgrade this one, for instance, to a major factory. Like that's only 5 IPP more to upgrade that one. And you only have 1 medium here, but you can also upgrade like this one here to a medium, or any one of these. You can move them and then upgrade them afterwards, right? So that's up to you. Getting that many factories is going to give you the option of doing that. And again, they come in groups of 5 anyway when you purchase them. So 5 medium and 5 minors. That's if you're going with this style of factories that I have here, where they're country specific. If you're just going with generic factories, then just add up all the factories that I'm telling you in this game, and that'll give you. But just remember, you're going to need 3 sizes of them: the large, medium, and small. And that's it for the Russians. Again, just concentrate on getting lots of land units. Air units are good for them. Yeah, as you see the opening setups here, like you don't get many boats, right? There's these ones. There's these ones. Here, let me just move this out of the way. There's 2 of them over there, and there's 1 of them over here. And then these ones that I put here in the middle of the land, they're not actually here. They're on the build chart. It's just that that would be inconvenient for me to show you way over where I set up a build chart. So I'll just put them here. So these ones are also going to probably go on. I think actually they are in the place units box of the build chart, so they will go on. Anyway, that's the Russians, and we'll go next to the Japanese. Okay, let's move on to Japan. 2 things you should know about Japan. Lots of boats, hardly any tanks. The tanks in this game for Japan, they cost 8 IPP instead of 6. Like everybody else's cost 6, but for Japan, they cost 8. And there's a reason for that. Like Japan just, they didn't build many tanks. They didn't put a lot of stock into armor. Back in World War II, there was a big fight between the Navy and the Army over who got the resources from Japan, and usually the Navy won out. And so they fought over who was to control the Air Force and everything, right? So anyway, consequently, not many tanks, but lots of boats for sure. And you're going to need a lot of boats and a lot of Marines, and they've even got special Marines for the Japanese. So let's just dive into it. I'm saying 30 infantry. You probably don't need 30. I've been giving you 30 for all the nations so far, but these guys you might not need 30. But better to be safe than sorry. I mean, you could be putting them on islands everywhere or something, right? So lots of infantry doesn't hurt you. 15 to 20 militia. I would say 15 is a low number, because there's 11 just in the opening setup alone, because they're on islands and stuff, right? And there's another thing that is part of this game. It used to be called civilian defense in version 2. So if you played version 2, then you probably know what I'm talking about, and that was in 1945 or later. And if the Americans had 5 transports, then you could build militia on Okinawa or on the mainland. And you probably can't see it because of all this crap here, but there's actually 4 territories here now. Tokyo is a city. Here, let me just move these around. Tokyo is a city now. So there's actually 4 territories here. So on the territories and on Okinawa, you were able to build militia for only 1 IPP, right? And it's changed slightly in this game. Now you have, they're called, what are they called? Patriotic Citizens Fighting Corps. And it's basically the same thing. They're militia, but different rules on them now. In this game, if the Americans at any time have more than twice the number of capital ships that the Japanese do in the Pacific, and if they have at least 3 transports in the Pacific, then you can build Patriotic Citizens Fighting Corps. And again, same thing on the Japanese homeland there, so there's 4 territories, and on Okinawa you can build militia for 1 IPP each. Now what I did was I painted up a number of these units for my Patriotic Citizens Fighting Corps, but that by all means that is not necessary. I just thought it'd be kind of cool just to, you know, these guys are different or slightly different, right? Because I paid less for them. They're going to fight the same as militia, but I think I might just use these guys on the homeland. For one thing, Japan is a pretty small, like it's only a half a circle, right? So that guy will fit in there a lot easier than a guy with a chip on him will, right? So that's what I'm going to do. I painted up a few yellow bases on these militia units. Anyway, 5 of those, or sorry, yeah, 5 of those, because there's 4 territories and Okinawa. But again, using militia is the same thing, so you don't have to worry about. So again, like all the other nations, 5 mountain infantry, 5 airborne infantry. Get those in groups of 5. There's a lot of mountains over here, so mountain infantry are good to have. Like everything in Asia over here is a mountain. That's another reason why tanks aren't even going to be effective, because only cavalry in version 3 are going to be able to move 2 spaces in mountains. Everything else will be only 1 space. And like in version 2, you could move tanks 2 spaces, but you couldn't blitz in mountains. But here, you're not even going to be able to move 2 spaces in mountains. So anyway, mountain infantry are not a bad buy for the Japanese. Now, getting into Marines, I think that you should probably have at least 10 Marines, because a lot of what you're going to be doing is building out here and then attacking China or the Netherlands or India or Australia or America. Like most of what you're going to attack is going to start with transports, right, and finish, you know, like attacking on land. Like you do start with some in here. There is a, you notice in J Hall there's a minor factory missing. I'm going to ask them about that, if they just forgot to put that on or what. I don't think it was a bad idea to have that factory here. It's not even called J Hall anymore. It's called something else. Anyway, now the upgraded Marines, they're like an elite Marine. The Americans also have them. They're called Special Navy Landing Force. And instead of attacking 2 and defending 4 like a regular Marine and a regular infantry, they're going to attack at 3 and defend at 5. So those are really handy to have. I've got 8 of them in mine, but 10 of them would be good as well. Just remember though, like you can always put chips under them, right? So that we're talking like having 8 of them in 8 different places. You could have 20 of them in 8 different places, right? So, but I think that like I've had 8, and I don't think I've had a problem in the games that I've played. I don't think I've run out. I think that I needed chips, but I don't think I've run out. Moving on. 10 motorized infantry, 5 cavalry, 10 mechanized infantry, 10 light tanks. Light tanks are good for the Japanese. I've mentioned light tanks before and how good they are anyway. Before 1939, you can't be building tanks. So light tanks are good because they're not more expensive. The Japanese light tank is the same price as everybody else's light tank. It's their medium and their heavy tanks that are 2 IPP more. So so when we get to medium tanks, I've only written down 5 of those. But you know what? You probably own more than 5 medium tanks for the Japanese. Just throw them all in your box. It doesn't matter. You're probably not going to buy many of them though, because they're just not very cost effective for the punch that they give you. And with all the mountains around, you're not going to be using them to blitz anyway. So, of course, you're not blitzing on islands either, right? There's usually only one territory on an island. So tanks are just not going to be a good buy for you. So 5 medium tanks, 5 heavy tanks, 5 advanced mechanized infantry, 10 artillery, 5 advanced artillery, 5 to 10 anti-aircraft artillery. So those are your anti-aircraft guns. Those are good for everybody, right, in this game. Okay, 10 to 15 submarines. Lots of subs is good because they're cheap, right? They're only $6, so they're kind of like your cannon fodder for your naval units. Plus, they've still got a punch, right? Like and they've got first strike if the other guys don't have destroyers. Subs are a good thing. I've written down 5 to 10 advanced submarines. With most other nations, other than America and Japan, 5 is good enough for those. But if you develop the advanced submarines for the Japan, then that's great for you. So if you develop that, then having 10 of them, that'll do a number on the Americans, depending on what they have for their weapons as well, right? But not a bad idea. 3 transport planes. I don't think you're going to use many transport planes for Japan. Like you'd think with water, that would be pretty handy. But really, I mean, you're building lots of transports anyway, right? So transport planes, when you think about it, they can't go any further because a transport just goes there, whereas a transport plane has to be able to land, so you got to make it back somewhere, right? I don't think I've ever seen anybody build a transport plane for the Japanese. But so that's why I just threw 3 of them in there. They're a unit that's in the game. 5 medium bombers, 12 fighters, 10 tactical bombers. Those are minimum numbers because you're going to have lots of carriers probably, right? And like in this opening setup here, this is 1936. You've got what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 planes already, or 5 fighters already, and 2 tactical bombers. So you might even need more than that. I'm just saying 12 and 10 at a minimum. But you get lots of them with your Axis and Allies games anyway, so you'll probably have lots of them already. 5 strategic bombers. Again, they're not any better for the Japanese than they are for anybody else. 5 heavy bombers, 5 jet fighters, 10 heavy cruisers. When I give you the numbers for the boats, just remember you can't have too many boats in this game. So if you've got more than 10 heavy cruisers, by all means, put them in your box. Minimum of 5 light cruisers. What do we have here in the opening setup? There's 1, 2 in the opening setup for this, but I think in the 1939 setup there's 4 or 5 actually for light cruisers. 5 battle cruisers. I put down 16 destroyers. You know what? That might not even be enough because I have 17 destroyers. The last game we played, a Version-3, a guy named Joey came to play. He's the guy that invented the Canada War set. He was using chips for his destroyers because he didn't have enough. The thing is, Japan, and only Japan in this game, can use a destroyer like everybody else. They cost the same for them and everything. Actually, no, they're $1 cheaper for them. And you can transport an infantry class unit on them. So you can't have enough destroyers in this game. I've got 16 written down, but if you have 20, then that's probably closer to the truth. 4 torpedo boat destroyers. You only start with 1 of them, right here. You can just barely see it there. Now you're going to get the one from Siam. You're going to align Siam at some point in this game. I think it's 1939, and they have one. So that gives you a second one. Now the other 2 are just in case you are playing diplomacy. So if you're never planning on playing diplomacy, don't worry, you only need 2 of them. You're never going to need more than 2 of them because Siam is the only country that you're going to get for free, basically. That's the only country that you're going to get. Kind of like Russia, the only country they get is Mongolia. All the other nations go to either the British or the Germans, or I guess in the case of South America, America, the United States could be getting some of those, right? So 4 torpedo boat. Okay, 5 tank destroyers. I don't think you're going to need many of those either, right? Because there's not going to be many tanks on this side of the board. But you know, get a minimum of 5 anyway. 5 self-propelled artillery. 2 coastal subs. Now you get only 1 on the board here to start off with, and then but there is one in the Netherlands here. So if you are playing diplomacy, then you know I could see you wanting to get these guys. Look at all that for free, right? I'm kind of cheating, but anyway, that could be something that you could do. Where are we here? 2 coastal defense ships. They don't get any in the opening setup, so the coastal defense ships are just if you're going to play diplomacy again. 5 battleships, so that's a minimum, right? 5 battleships. 3 fast battleships. 2 or 3 heavy battleships. Japan is actually, they're the ones with the inside track to getting heavy battleships. There are already 2 out of the 4 spaces along the technology chart to getting heavy battleships. So at least 2 or 3 of those. Probably not more than 3 because it's the cost, right? Like at some point you're paying way too much just for a few units, right? So I'd say probably 2, but it could be 3. 6 fleet carriers minimum, I'd say. You start with 1 in the game, plus there's 1 on the build chart. Of course, carriers are going to be good for the Japanese, right? Because you're roaming down to islands down here. You're going up that way, perhaps. You might even go, I've seen the Japanese get into the Mediterranean, so you're going to want to take some planes with you, right? So 6 of those. These, by the way, over here, these 2 things are on the build chart to begin the game, and these 3 escort carriers, they go down onto the build chart when you are at war with the Americans. So eventually these 3 make it in the game, and that was in version 2 as well, where those did the same thing. So I'm saying 5 escort carriers, 2 heavy carriers, 2 seaplanes, 12 transports, 5 to 10 attack transports, 3 major factories, 5 medium factories, 5 minor factories. I think like you could conceivably put 4 major factories on, but I don't think you're going to do that. When you look at, I just noticed as I was preparing when I was putting the Japanese on the board, it's the first time I've set up the Japanese since I've got this map from Doug at historicalboardgaming.com, and I've noticed that you see this here, that means that this is not touching this. So the Americans, for instance, they can't just go and put 1 million dudes on here and then walk down to Tokyo. It's just not going to work that way for them. So for that reason alone, I don't think that you're going to put a major factory on this territory here. But you know, if you are going, you could buy 4 major factories, but I think you're probably only going to use 3 at the most. In the opening setup, curiously, there's only 1, and that's on Tokyo. You only get one medium factory down here and 1 major factory in Tokyo. There's no factory over here, which is kind of weird. There's no shipyard over here, yet there's 3 or 4 shipyards at this territory down here. So that could change. I could see that changing. I could see somebody just stamping things down there and giving it more thought later and perhaps putting a factory here. You might get that factory back in the territory formerly known as J-Hall, the word now that I can't pronounce. Again, though, but lots of boats. You can't have too many boats. And the light cruisers are already available at historicalboardgaming.com. They've always been available. That's this sculpt right here with the green on it. So there's one for them. The Americans have one already on historicalboardgaming.com, and so does the Germans. They've got a light cruiser as well. So I'm using those cruisers for everybody. I just paint my units, right? Like I've used some American ones for the British and some German ones for the Italians, and that's how I've stocked my game. So anyway, that's it for the Japanese. So I guess it'll be the Commonwealth next. So let me see. You know what? I'm just going to end this video now because I think the Commonwealth is going to be a pretty long one. They might get their own because there's actually 3 nations involved in the Commonwealth. So I'm just going to end this video here. So look for the Commonwealth video that's going to be the next in this series after this one. Take care, everyone. General Hand Grenade out.